abandoned building in the entire world. This is part of our most useless mega project series. With a towering height of 600 meters, the Golden Finance 117 in Tianjin, China holds the Guinness World Record for the world's tallest unoccupied building.
All right. Okay, so guys, I just wanted to talk about China today, and this is really going to be kind of a core story that we will follow, and we'll do a lot of follow-up stories. And this is really about the property situation unfolding in China that has, it has been going on for some time, but I think it can give us some good context, as Jack was talking at the beginning about collateral shortages, the fact that we are a globally synchronized economy, meaning if one area is going to be impacted, if China's impacted, the US is also going to be impacted. And so I think that's something that a lot of people miss. I think if you go back to the crisis, many people argue that China is the one that got us out of that crisis. And so it's really important to understand what's going on with them right now, and also to understand that it took a long time for these current trends to sort of materialize and what was wrong with these trends. And so I wanted to start with this building, kind of like Jack does. He has a nice little intro to a lot of his stories sometimes. But this is the tallest abandoned building in the world, which is about 200 meters taller than the Freedom Tower or One World Trade Center, which Travis and I actually visited in January, I think. And so I want you guys to think about the Freedom Tower. We'll come back to that in just a second. But this building, construction began in 2008. They topped it out. That's where there's always a topping ceremony for these high rises. I don't know if you guys knew that, but it's where they kind of, plant a tree or something at the top. But they topped this in 2015. However, it remains unfinished today due to issues with that developer, due to liquidity issues. He wasn't able to finish it. And guys, the idea behind this building it was built in Tianjin, is that they were going to bring the world's rich and famous to Tianjin, which, if you know anything about it, that's not where the rich and famous live, but they were going to create a polo center. So people were going to come because they love polo. So back in, essentially all of these different ghost cities, these different complexes, were born out of, originally back in China, you basically rented your housing from your employer. But when the Chinese decided to actually create a housing market, they probably looked at the United States and said, hey, their housing market is about anywhere from 15 to 20% of GDP. Look how well that works. Let's do that. And so essentially the government started selling those homes to the employees at kind of a discounted price. But us humans are not very original. Anytime, you get into this, I got sold something cheap that I might be able to sell for a higher amount. What happens? The casino is open, speculation. Everybody gets, excited. They decide to build, the world's tallest abandoned building around a polo center. And so, this tower is there's nothing there, guys, that it's completely abandoned. And so it reminds me a lot, just coming back quickly, before we get into Evergrande, particularly, when Travis and I were at the Freedom Tower in January, I worked down in, every day I had to go underneath the World Trade Center to my office at One World Financial. I know how busy that place used to be. During the week when it was cold, it didn't matter if it was negative 10 degrees outside, you would go out for lunch. When Travis and I were there, it was completely deserted. In fact, one of the guys that just kind of walks around the park to ask tourist questions came up to us and said, hey, do you guys need any help? And so although you can read news stories about the Freedom Tower, for instance, being 95% occupied, guys, there was nobody there. And so I just want us to keep this in mind for perspective that, something that I kind of encountered when I went on the road in February of 23 was that I would see these abandoned apartment buildings, multifamily buildings that were, huge, over 20 stories, and no one was in them. And when I would make this comparison to what was happening with Evergrande, for instance, in China, people would say I was crazy. And I'm sure somebody's going to say it today. But there was a moment when I was in Nashville, Tennessee, when it hit me that in many ways we are not dissimilar with what's going on in China. And whether there's one abandoned building we can point to or one ghost city, places like Lakewood Ranch, like all that commercial in New York City, all that commercial in Dallas are similar to this in that all these multifamily complexes, all of these, high rises were built because we thought there were a lot more rich people than they were. And this is what happened in Tianjin. There weren't rich people living there and no one wanted to come. So I just kind of want to talk about Evergrande and the situation in China for a second, just so everybody gets it. There was a huge population in China, a boom, essentially, kind of, similar to the boomers. But what happened with the one-child policy is now China is on a huge demographic decline. Very similar. I mean, we didn't have the one-child policy, but we are also on a demographic decline. Not as much as China. A lot of people talk about that, Peter Zeihan, others, and just what that's going to do to the economy. But just know that between 1978 and 2007, residential per capita space quadrupled. This is huge. This is huge growth. And in many ways, we talk about here in this country, the inventory shortage and the fact that, we needed to meet the demand the millennials would have for housing. And so again, thinking about narratives, we're looking at China right now, but I want you to think about the narratives we hear in the US as well. And so talking about those reforms, essentially China created this housing market out of thin air. We've been dealing with this kind of crazy housing market that's regulated, very institutionalized since the 30s with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, government agencies getting involved in our housing market that has created this very regulated. And that's what a lot of people forget is that the housing market in the United States is largely fueled by the government. Fannie, Freddie, the agencies back about 85% of existing mortgages. So just going forward, I just wanted to mention Mongolia because these guys that sort of went out, did the Big Short in 2015 and really understood what was happening in the Chinese market. They were just researching, and what really piqued their interest was a story about a ghost city in Mongolia called Inner Mongolia. And so there was this documentary that Al Jazeera did. So very interesting that Jack's story also centered around Mongolia. Not saying these two things are connected, but I think, very interesting themes. And so this New York hedge fund manager, Parker Quillen, he goes to visit this golden metropolitan. Back in 2015, they put on shorts. They have to exit their shorts because the stock actually it went up 400%. So, very similar. We've seen XHB, the builder stock here, really get out of control, hit all-time highs. So I want everyone to actually also think about how long these things take to unfold as everyone, I think, is getting very impatient with our housing market and what's going on there. So these guys come and visit. They went to 40 Evergrande projects in 16 cities. Travis, does this sound familiar at all to you? And what they saw is that buildings were unfinished and unsold. So what did they do? They looked, right? This is something that we talk about all the time. People are not looking. They're not looking at what's actually happening. If anybody had gone to that building and toured around Tianjin, they would have said, are you out of your mind? Like, who's going to live there? And this is what Travis and I have been saying when we travel all over the country here in the United States. And I understand people are going to hate that I'm comparing us to China, but I think we're more closely aligned than I think a lot of people think. And so in 2016, they published this report, and it is an expose, and it's showing that Evergrande, for instance, it's just a house of cards. What happens? Again, stock increases 400%. Everybody ignores it. And by the time we hit 2019, the Chinese have about 80% of their wealth in real estate. And you guys might have heard me mention, or others, that really global wealth 85% of it is real estate. And so this is a huge, you guys may wonder, you're doing a news channel, two of you focus on, real estate. Well, in reality, it is one of the biggest driving forces of the global economy. And that's why. But we also want to share stories, these stories like from China, these geopolitical stories, macro economy stories. So then what happens in 2020? The Chinese come and say, we gotta chill out, we gotta calm down, because this isn't going to work. Because the way Evergrande sort of got this big was through a lot of debt. Okay, and so Xi has been known to say that essentially something that we say, which is where you live should not be a casino. But that's a little scary to say, okay, I agree with G, but that, that's what he basically has said, the property sector should not be a casino. We are going to have to clean this up now. So a lot of different things happen. They had this three red line policy that was focused around kind of, restrictions around liabilities. And what I want to do, and this is why I say we're going to do a follow story, is I'm actually going to use these three red lines, and I'm going to look at apply it to some of the builder balance sheets here, because I think that's going to be interesting. So again, who is Evergrande? They were a developer. Okay, they were involved in new home construction. They took on too much debt. Okay, so this is, I just want everyone to kind of listen to the themes of this story. And oops, I messed that up. So anyway, from that point, we now have had China coming out and saying, oh, wait a minute, we can't abandon this sector that much. And they have started with some down payment assistance programs, all sorts of ways to try and stimulate the housing market. And so in many ways, this is exactly what we have been doing through our own down payment assistance programs. Trying to bring people back into the market to keep it going. And so, again, I just kind of wanted to introduce this idea of Evergrande. We've all heard about it since 2021, but these themes, we're seeing very similar themes in the United States. And just as the government tried to kind of rationalize things, they realized they couldn't. It was too destructive to the Chinese economy. And they've re-entered with these down payment assistance programs. Things like, if you think about Biden talking about that $10,000 credit for a first-time home buyer. So I'll just stop there. Just want to introduce the idea that of these themes that we're experiencing here, looking at China could be a good mirror.
I have some questions for you, Melody. We got some questions starred up as well. First of all, when I was reading that timeline that you made of Evergrande, and I actually cheated, I read ahead, and I think it was like 3/4 of the way down on that timeline, it quoted the Chinese president, and it said he's telling developers, no more borrowing for homes. Homes are to live in, not to speculate on. It's funny how he's saying that now that there's a housing market crash, but anyways. So my question for you, though, is being that, and you mentioned this, being that our economy is globalized, doesn't it make sense for China, Germany, and Japan to have a housing market crash as they are now? Prices are going down on their values. Doesn't it make sense, Melody, that would have to happen generally with them first, and then it hits the US because we're globalized, because we have world currency? Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it could. I just think that, I do, just like I talk about, Travis, like, real estate is local, but it's also subject to macro things. I think that we can't lose focus on our micro economy and the different actions that the government's going to take to continue to prop up the housing market. Because, Biden has come out and said, and we'll talk about this in the Real Page story later, that housing unaffordability is one of their top, issues that they want to address. And so we're going to see a ton more programs that come our way. But I think what's fascinating is, I think in this cycle, China might be a little ahead of us. And so I think we can continue to watch them and see, did these programs help their housing market? And of course, we don't get all the information from China. We get what they want us to know. And so we always have to take that with a grain of salt. But I would also argue that we get what our administration wants us to know as well, unless we do some digging. But I think if we watch these latest efforts they're making to they're actually having the counties are actually buying properties. This is something I actually talked about in January of 23 that I think is going to happen, is that you're going to have counties getting involved in foreclosures and things like that, because there's just going to be so many abandoned properties. So they're trying to interject in the housing market to save it. So I think watching these efforts is going to be telling for what's ahead for us.
Now, Melody, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I've covered this topic a lot on my channel. And whenever you dare say anything critical of China or the Chinese economy, you get an army of angry Chinese commenters, which is interesting because YouTube is largely banned in China. So I just want to take one moment to send a welcome to all those adorable little commie keyboard warriors who are probably going to show up in the comments at the behest of Xi Jinping to say how full of it we are for criticizing the paper dragon. But thank you, guys. I appreciate the engagement to all you pro-Chinese commenters who are going to show up here. But what I'm talking about here, we've got 65 million empty housing units in China right now, roughly. That was as of a few years ago. Data's hard to come by in China because everything is behind the Great Firewall. But roughly 65 million vacant units. And the way they build, these developers operate in China, is very much like a Ponzi scheme. They pre-sell these apartments. You take out a mortgage on an apartment that's not even built yet. You pay for it. And then what happens is these developers run like Ponzi schemes. They use the proceeds from sales of apartments that haven't even been built yet to build the apartments they already owe. And so that's really what sank Evergrande, because not only do they owe hundreds of billions of dollars, but they owe millions of apartments still. And so China is right now struggling to figure out how to build the 20 million paid for, mortgaged, but still unbuilt apartments. So they still need to make the problem worse before they can even start worrying about fixing it. And what I have here is showing you China's population. And you can see since the mid-20 teens, China's population growth has been falling. And just 2 years ago, it went negative, and it's still accelerating to the downside because of the one-child policy. It turns out a lot of those stories we heard about things happening to little girls were true. And there's a 35 million male to female imbalance in China. There are 35 million men who will never have children because there's just not enough women. And so the birth rate in China is in free fall. They are in population collapse right now. And this is only going to accelerate because you have fewer and fewer babies being born, and you have fewer and fewer people aging into the job market and the housing market. So not only does China have a huge housing oversupply, but the demand is going to continue to plummet because there's going to be less and less people to live in them. This is a multi-generational problem China has playing out. This isn't just your classic real estate bubble bursting, is the point I'm trying to make here. This is a major demographic shift, a bubble within a bubble within a bubble. And I know that wasn't really a question. That was just me pontificating. But I think most Westerners view this issue through the lens of what we went through in 2008. And this problem is a whole other layer deep than that. This is so much bigger than 2008 here in the States.
Yeah. And I would just add on to that, Jack, is that our demographic picture doesn't look so great either. It's not where China is. Don't get me wrong. But we already have 15 million vacant properties right now that the boomers, we are kind of owned by the boomers. And we're not birthing babies here in the United States the way that we were. And so honestly, you can look at Japan, you can look at China, and you can see what is the future for the United States. And one of the former heads, Jack, of the, he was the deputy head of the Statistics Bureau, said that there was enough vacant homes for 3 billion people. Okay. And so, but to your point, no one really knows. But guys, they don't know here either. That $15 million, 15 million homes, vacant homes, that's from our census. That's from our Statistics Bureau. And I can tell you what I feel and see when I'm out on the road is that we have huge vacancy here already. And, of course, everybody thinks there's an inventory shortage, but I also think that we're not decelerating at the rate from a population perspective that China is. However, we are in a declining demographic picture that no one is talking about when they talk about inventory.
And, that brings me to this next comment here from Charles Melody. Maybe you could touch on this. He brings up a pretty fair point. Now, you already mentioned 15 million vacant homes. We have that here in the U.S. But, to his point, while China and Japan don't have the immigration to fuel population growth, so they will have more inventory ratio-wise. They also have a 90% homeownership rate. I believe what he's suggesting is as a result of the immigration here, as compared to China, we have more demand that will absorb any deflation or some of the deflation. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't. So as one thing that I've been telling to people on X Twitter that keep saying, but immigration, they're already here. And so, I've been traveling all over this country. We still have vacancy. Yes, I know a lot of them are staying in hotels in New York,
yes,
but I'm pretty sure those hotels will then be transitioned to permanent apartments. And by the way, they're certainly not going to be buying all the are living in the multifamily luxury. They're not going to be able to afford these new homes, not even with, grants from the government. And so there's 1.4 billion people in China. There's 340 million approximately here in the United States. So they're much bigger than us. But I don't think, the immigration story is they're here. Biden supposedly is going to sign an order to clamp this down. We shall see if that occurs. But we've got plenty of housing, guys. And I know that's hard for everyone to accept, but just drive around and look for yourself.
On the point of population, real quick, if I could, this is very much a global phenomenon, what we just drifted into. It's particularly potent in the Asian cultures. China, South Korea is actually the worst when it comes to the fertility rate. Japan is close behind, along with China. But Europe and the United States absolutely have it too. The global South America, Africa, the Middle East is the only places really in the world, and India for that matter, where the population is still growing right now. So the world population is actually set to decline, even though the World Economic Forum and a lot of those globalists are saying we all need to start eating insects because the population growth is going to explode in the next few years. That is just factually untrue. If we don't all get drunk and start making bad decisions, the world population is going to collapse. So do it for the human civilization, everybody. Drink up and make bad choices. We need to start making babies again. I'm joking, but if we don't start making babies, things will go wrong. All right. Crime rates will rise. Economy will collapse. Labor prices will explode higher because of a shortage of people. This will be a really big problem.
We got one more comment here, and I apologize to the viewers. I have a cat. Please don't hate me. Okay, I have a cat. It's attacking me right now. It's messing up my equipment. It's very distracting. I love this cat, though.
How much do you think that reduces your home price?
I thought you were going to say my respect. I'm like,
one cat.
I've already have reduced respect.
Yeah. One cat instead of 100. Yeah.
It's right here. Okay. Anyways, I love this cat. All right, I'll shut up. So I forgot where we're at. Anyways, comment here. Yes, comment right here. To the point of immigration, rich immigration, the big building, countries like China or Russia don't understand. They don't understand that capital doesn't have a homeland, nor does it have any loyalty. Rich people won't move to a dictatorship because they know their money is at risk. What do you think about that, Melody?
I say we turn that, and I say let's look at what happened after February 2022 when the United States started, basically seizing Russian assets and deploying them against another country. And so I think that too, you can apply that again to the United States to some degree, is that the rich in certain areas of this company no longer feel that the United States is a safe place to park capital because of the fact that the U.S. government willy-nilly just went out there on the global stage and seized these assets. So I think, yes, I would agree. But then too, I often get when I talk about China, this whole story about, well, the rich are they're fleeing, all their money's coming to the United States. Sure, I think there is a component of that, definitely. But also there are plenty of loyalists to the Communist Party. And they will do what the state tells them to do, no matter what. And they will park their capital where the state tells them to park it. And so I think we just have to, I know it's difficult, but we have to understand that there's multiple themes that could happen at the same time, and that the state is much bigger than this, handful of the global ultra rich. And so we can't rely on that capital. And yes, I think largely during the banking crisis, a lot of the Chinese were saved at SVB because of their political ties. I mean, there are a lot of people in our government that have very close ties to China. But I think largely the state does not trust the United States anymore. And the state is going to dictate the majority of where capital is going to go.
Okay. Anything you want to add, Jack?
I would add that capital is mobile. Capital is not fixed in place. And China does have a capital flight problem, which they have done very well to crack down on. There has been the purchases of real estate here in the States. I do think that's a little overblown. But the Chinese cracked down very hard on crypto over the last few years. A lot of capital was fleeing China in the form of cryptocurrency. They have since cracked down on that. The U.S. is helping with the KYC laws. But China has recently shown a lot of interest in gold. And although they slowed down their gold purchases, they didn't buy any gold in May at their central bank. But there's been a lot of flow from west to east of gold and silver over the last few years, because the average Chinese household has 90% of their wealth in real estate. It's not like here in the States where the average middle-class family is pretty evenly split between housing, stocks, and bonds, right? You've got equity in your home, and then you've probably got a retirement plan that's in like a 60-40 bond stock portfolio. So the average middle-class family is pretty spread out across housing, stocks, and bonds. In China, it is 90% housing. I mean, China is so overexposed to real estate, it is ridiculous. And now the average Chinese is losing confidence in that real estate market. They don't trust their stock market, so they're hiding in gold. So this story about the Chinese real estate collapse could be a major headwind for precious metals in the years ahead.
And we're running out of time.
Might have that it might have some connection to the Trafigura story as well. I mean, what's happening with
those
commodities. Anyway, go ahead. Trafigura, whatever. Yeah.
Can you say toy boat 5 times fast?
No.
Yeah, don't even try. I can. Okay, so I got you. Good. All right, you guys, that, my friends, is a wrap.